Hello, Dr. Carmen Bryant, Psychological Health Consultants and Services, and Redefining Yourself, a program that was developed for women that are contemplating leaving, needing more information, or recovering from domestic violence, specifically narcissist abuse. Today, I just wanted to talk about post-traumatic stress. I had a question that was asked of me. Thank you for the question. There's two questions, actually. I'm going to address one question because the other one is going to require a whole nother video. The first question is how to deal with PTSD after narcissist abuse, and the second question was healthy relationships after surviving narcissist abuse. So that's a whole nother topic that I'll talk about, but I'll address how to deal with PTSD after from narcissist abuse. First of all, you have to identify post-traumatic stress disorder. What is it? But before I go into that, there was a question that was asked in reference to, is it possible that a spouse can rape their wife? Now, keep in mind, even though the program is developed for women, men and women go through it alike. So even though it is a program that was developed for women, remember, men go through the exact same thing, just at a different way. But majority of the things that I talk about are some of the things that they've experienced as well, and I've had gentlemen tell me that. And thank you very much to all of you who have sent emails and responded to the videos and let me know that the videos are helping you. That motivates me to continue doing them. I know that for some of you it's not convenient to post comments on my YouTube channel because of the fact that you may still be with the abuser. And so you have to limit, what you post and the questions that you ask. And I respect that and I honor that. You're welcome to email me at any time and I will respond. Do know that my email sometimes has this high volume of emails, and sometimes depending on where the email is coming from, it also sends it to my junk mail. And so, but I will respond to you. So the first question that I had is it possible? So I'm going to answer this because I did not get an opportunity to answer it on the narcissist intimacy and sex video that I did. To address marital rape. So how many of you think that a husband and wife, but husband can rape their wife? The answer is marital rape in United States law is also known as spousal rape. It is a non-consensual sex in which the perpetrator is the victim's spouse. It is a form of partner rape, of domestic violence, and of sexual abuse. Today, marital rape is illegal in all 50 states. Let's see. The criminalization of marital rape in the United States started in the mid-1970s, and by 1993, marital rape became a crime in all 50 states, under at least one section of the Sexual Offense Code. During the 1990s, most states differentiated between the way marital rape and non-marital rape were treated. The laws have continued to change and evolve, with most states reforming their legislation in the 21st century, but differences remain in some states, in particular South Carolina. So, yes, a spouse can rape their wife. First of all, you have to remember, in a narcissistic relationship, well, that's a domestic violence in general, in a narcissistic relationship, you are an object. You don't have thoughts for yourself. You don't have your own opinions, and it doesn't matter. They'll give you their opinions. They'll issue those opinions and thoughts out to you. And so your thoughts and feelings, remember, they lack empathy, and so it doesn't matter what you say. You are a tool or a source of supply to be used, and when they want sex, and you don't have the right to say no. They'll take it if they want to, because you don't have the right to say no. You're the spouse, so how can you say no? You're my wife, you're my husband. How dare you say no? There are women that have lost the right to even use their name and their credit. If the narcissist wants to use their name or wants to use their credit to open up a line of credit or a major line of credit, and the wife says no, the narcissist will do it anyway. Disregard your no. And they felt like they have lost their identity. They have lost their ability to say no. So there you have it. Marital rape is illegal in all 50 states. And yes, a spouse can rape his wife. It is a mutual consensual agreement between two adults that don't have severe mental health disorders that are going to take it from each other. But it's consent of both parties to engage in sexual contact, however that is. That's between the two of you, and yes, so it is a crime. So now let's go to post-traumatic stress. First of all, you have to understand what post-traumatic stress is. So in this manual, the DSM-5, remember this is the manual that is used by psychiatrists, psychologists in the mental health field. And this manual was updated. We used to work off of the DSM-4, and we are now on the DSM-5. The DSM-5 in here is copyrighted, and it has the year published, I think it was 2013. I'm not sure if we got it later on, and I can't recall when I ordered the new manual, but this is 2013. Now, I myself, not only am a veteran, but I'm also a Veterans Choice Provider, meaning that I contract with the VA to serve veterans as well. And so a lot of the training that I do dealing with trauma, I also go through like the VA training. In the VA training, the professional section that I usually work with, and you can find this on their site, the VA site, and it's ptsdva.gov. www.ptsd.va.gov, and you can look for professional information concerning PTSD, especially about veterans. Now, so you have post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a disorder that's in the DSM manual, and it describes it. You also hear terms used of the term complex post-traumatic stress. I'm going to tell you what the difference between the two are. The complex PTSD is not in the DSM. Now, this DSM was published 2013, and this information that's on the site was updated in 2016. And so there's a doctor by the name of Dr. Judith Herman of Harvard University that suggested a new diagnosis to be added to the DSM called complex post-traumatic stress. And so that actual diagnosis is not in the manual, but it is used, and I'm going to tell you what the difference between the two of them are. So post-traumatic stress is a stress disorder that was developed after exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence in one or more of the following ways. Direct experiences, so experiencing yourself, witnessing it in person, occurring to someone else, learning about the event through like occurring to a close family member, threatened death, that kind of exposure. Experience repeated or extreme exposure to aversive details of traumatic events like first responders collecting human remains, police officer repeatedly exposed to details of child abuse. So they can develop post-traumatic stress as well, especially our police officers and of course our veterans. And so I went to this site because I know that a lot of times when I explain something, I'm explaining something from a clinical standpoint. So a lot of times, the information I'm given is almost like psycho mumbo jumbo. We use a whole bunch of clinical terms and everything. So I went to my favorite site, Site Central, and even though it is a blog, a lot of the stuff that they're saying is stuff that they're saying in the book, but it just makes it easier to understand as more layman terminology, as opposed to really clinical terminology. And so, post-traumatic stress, let's look at it and see. Let me find it. So we're gonna look at the symptomology of post-traumatic stress, okay? So flashbacks of behavior of the trauma, so having flashbacks, extreme fear for your personal safety, highly strung and nervous, and remember the narcissist always tries to create an environment where you're always high-strung and always under a lot of anxiety, constantly scanning an environment for potential threats, depression, irritability, and guilt, multiple physical complaints, so physical ailments. You might engage in self-harm, for example, cutting, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, panic attacks, constantly having panic attacks out the blue. Don't know why you're having panic attacks, even when the perpetrator comes around, just having panic attacks. Numbing and shock, impaired concentration and memory, so problems with concentration and memory. And if you go back and listen to the one in reference to how the abuse affects the brain of the abused, and it's the narcissist brain and the effects of the abuse on the survivor's brain. It does impact your concentration and your memory, feelings that you're going crazy, insomnia and nightmares. And so you have nightmares about the abuse, or you have problems falling asleep and staying asleep, obsessive compulsive behaviors or eating disorders, so you overeat, or anorexia or bulimia, suppressed anger, You might dissociate. Dissociation is also a part of the diagnosis for post-traumatic stress disorder. So it's feelings of depersonalization or dissociation, meaning it feels like the world is going on around you and you're in this bubble and you're just watching it happen. Or in extreme stressful situation or traumatic situations, the mind, in order to protect itself, will dissociate and think of something else, or dissociate and think of something else. I'll give you an example. When you're driving down the road and your mind is really on something and you end up at home and you can't remember the drive, well, that is a mild form of dissociation. But when a person is going through trauma, or has experienced trauma, the mind sometimes dissociates and they don't recall, they don't recall details of the events. They don't recall where they are. They end up somewhere and don't know how they got there. And so the mind does the best it can, the brain does the best it can to protect a person that has been through trauma. Another thing, you might be suicidal, thoughts of suicide, actual attempts of suicide. You're constantly second guessing yourself. And remember that a narcissist will keep you in that state where you can't trust anything, much less yourself. That all the, you're totally dependent on that narcissist to make all decisions for you. And so you constantly second guessing your decisions, second guessing your thoughts, because remember, they were irrelevant. And so, difficulty making decisions, and so that comes along with second guessing yourself. You can't make decisions because you don't know everything that you've always done was wrong. So before you met the person, the narcissist, things that you did were right. Now, after you gotten into a relationship or come out of a relationship, it's hard to make decisions because no matter what I do, I'm wrong. Everything is wrong. I don't make right decisions. I'm wrong. So you constantly question, did I do something wrong? Was that right? Was that okay? Because you've always been told it wasn't. That was a part of the manipulation and the control. Now, the difference between post-traumatic stress, having experienced that and having long-term effects from the experience that you went through, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, this definition identifies chronic long-term stress resulting from emotional trauma in which the victim has little chance of escape. And so this is a constant thing going on. Post-traumatic stress, you've been exposed to the trauma, and now you're having a response to the trauma years, maybe months after the event has taken place. Complex post-traumatic stress is when you're in it constantly. And some examples are emotional, physical, or sexual abuse, objectification. Remember, the narcissists objectify you. Gaslighting and false accusations. Push or pull or splitting behavior. Remember, if you go to the trauma bonds, we talked about that. Alternating raging and hoovering behaviors. Go back to the trauma bonds. And crisis conditions. And so, let's see. So I covered that part. So let me go back. And so remember, narcissist abuse is a kind of psychological abuse that leaves a victim feeling with lasting feelings of self-worthlessness, inadequacy, incompetency, and not deserving of love or respect. And the harm that a narcissist abuse can inflict on a victim can be crippling and lifelong. Narcissists generally abuse slowly and unrelentingly until they have gained control over the minds of their victims. They use language in a specific way that is so subtle that the victims often fail to realize that they are at the receiving end until it's too late. You've already been exposed by them. Let's see. Okay, got that. Make sure I give you everything. Okay, so on the VA site, it says that, remember that many traumatic events, car accidents, natural disasters, are of time-limited duration. However, in some cases, people experience chronic trauma that continues or repeats for months or years at a time. So keep in mind, when you're in a narcissistic relationship, and for those of you that have been in it for a prolonged period of time, it's constant trauma back to back to back to back to back, as opposed to PTSD, where there's a traumatic event and you're having to relive those events. You're remembering those events. These are things that have happened, may have happened in the past, But complex post-traumatic stress is when you're constantly being exposed to it over and over and over and over again, which is the case of narcissist abuse. Constantly, they're relentless. They don't stop. I know in your mind you think like, how is it that I'm in this relationship but they never stop? They never get tired. They never get tired. It's almost like a drug to them. They never get tired. They constantly, repeatedly abuse the people that they're in a relationship with. They can't help themselves. Remember, I gave you the analogy of the frog and the scorpion. How can you expect the scorpion not to have stung the frog? That's in his nature. That's in his character. That's how a narcissist is. And so let's see. So it says the current PTSD diagnosis, this is from Dr. Judith Herman. It says that the current PTSD diagnosis often does not fully capture the severe psychological harm that occurs with prolonged, repeated trauma. People who experience chronic trauma often report additional symptoms alongside formal PTSD symptoms, such as changes in their self-concept and the way that they adapt to stressful events. And so let's see. Here it has what types of trauma are associated with complex PTSD. And some examples are, and first of all, is in these situations, the victim is under the control of the perpetrator and unable to get away from the danger. And remember, with trauma bonds, you're thinking, well, you can get away if you want to, but with trauma bonds, psychologically, they are imprisoned in their mind and in their emotions and bonded to this perpetrator. And so just because they're not physically incapable of leaving the situation, mentally they are incapable of leaving the situation. Like I said, be sensitive. Go and watch the trauma bonds video. You can be more sensitive to the people that are in domestic violence situation before you say you can just get up and leave if you want to. You're re-victimizing the person and you're making them feel like they're weak. And the perpetrator is already doing that. So some examples are concentration camps, prisoner of war camps, prostitution brothels, long-term domestic violence, long-term child physical abuse, long-term child sexual abuse, organized child exploitation rings. So these sexual predators as well. And so think about it. And so some of the difficulties that people will experience is emotional regulation. So it may include persistent sadness, suicidal thoughts, explosive anger, or inhibited anger. Think about it. You never had the right to be angry. You didn't have the right to be angry when you were being abused. They took that right away from you, and they abused you for having the feelings of anger. That's an insult to them. So you were never allowed to properly be angry. There's nothing wrong with being angry. It's a human emotion. It just depends on what you do when you're angry. You can't go out and murder someone because you're angry, but you have the right to have emotions, and you have the right to feel offended, and you have the right to be angry. But when that has been taken away from you, the problem results in emotional regulation problems. You don't have the right to be angry, or you get angry very quick when you're offended, and the way that you respond is the way that you've been trained. I'm not allowed to be this way, and then I am angry. So consciousness, includes forgetting traumatic events, reliving traumatic events, or having episodes in which one feels detached from one's mental process, or body, meaning dissociation. You've been through it so much, you dissociate. There are some women that have lived their life and they live by what they thought they were supposed to do. I'm a mother, so I'm supposed to feed the kids. I'm supposed to give them baths. I'm supposed to do this. I'm supposed to do this. I'm supposed to do this. And sometimes they're emotionally distant from the children because of the fact that they've dissociated. So they're living in a role, but they're totally dissociated in order for them to survive this domestic violence. It's almost like when they finally come out and they look back at their life, it's like I was living in a dream. In order for my mind to register or be able to function on a daily basis, it's like I was living a dream. I was never really there. My body was there. The things that I had to do, I was there. But mentally, I was not there. I dissociated in order for me to survive this abuse. Self-perception may include helplessness, shame, guilt, stigma, and a sense of being completely different from other human beings. Remember, a narcissist is going to make you feel like you're different than any other human beings. Remember, what is their normal human being? They'll tell you that, normal people or the average person, well, how can you judge or how can you regulate what is normal when you are abnormal yourself? So you're looking at people in your abnormal glasses with the mirror on the inside of your glasses, and how can you think about it. How can you gauge what is normal and what is abnormal when you are abnormal yourself and you don't see people normally? And so now you have the victim who doesn't know what is normal and not normal, or abnormal, and so they live in a lot of guilt and shame. I should have been able to prevent this. I should have been able. And for people to say, well, I don't understand why you didn't leave, you're re-victimizing them, and so they living in guilt and shame, so they don't want to talk. So a lot of times they're cut off from people because they don't know what to say, because people are not going to understand what they've been through. Self-perception, okay, I already said that. Distorted perception of the perpetrator. Examples include attributing total power to the perpetrator, becoming preoccupied with the relationship to the perpetrator, or preoccupied with revenge. Some people want revenge. Some women that have been in domestic violent relationship, they're thinking of revenge. They're so angry and they're so upset at what has happened. They, even when they come out, that they're thinking of revenge. What am I going to do? When you get to a point where all you think about is trying to get back at the perpetrator, there's a problem. Relations with other example includes isolation, distress, or repeated search for a rescuer. Remember, you've been isolated for so long and taught that no one can be trusted that you remember, and you question yourself. And so it's hard to trust people when you have not been exposed to people. And so the narcissist has given you a perception about people from their distorted view and their power and control bubble, that you don't have the capacity to trust other people because you haven't been exposed to them. So when people are trying to help you, you don't know what to. That's just like a wounded animal. When they're wounded, they all snap at the owner that loved them the most because they're trying to defend themselves. Well, likewise, when a person is coming out of an abusive relationship, you don't know who to trust. So you snap at everyone because you don't trust your own instincts. You don't trust everything that you've done is wrong. Remember. So now my judgment is wrong. I don't know how to I don't know how to talk to people. I don't know how to, have friendships. I don't know anything. It's like you're born all over again. It's like I don't know what to do. Someone needs to teach me. That's why it's best to connect with a mentor or with strong women that will take you. They'll be honest with you. They'll roll in the mud with you. They understand the trauma that you've been through, and they'll help you out and love you. The tribe of women that we need to be to support each other when a woman is coming out the situation is like coming out with your nerves completely exposed, and any touch or anything, I don't know how to respond to that. I don't know what a good touch and a bad touch is. I don't know what a compliment, or I don't know when constructive criticism as opposed to tearing down my self-esteem. So you're coming out of a situation in which you don't know how to think about yourself. You don't know how to relate to people, because you have been in bondage with this abuser. Let's see. And you've been isolated for so long. So one system of meanings may include a loss of sustaining faith or of sense of hopelessness and despair. Constantly living in despair. Now, this is all a part of the complex post-traumatic stress. Some of the symptoms of PTSD or complex post-traumatic stress is that you become very, very sensitive to what you hear, what you smell, what you see. I've explained this to someone else before. If you were molested as a child, there's certain things that you recognize on perpetrators. There's certain things that you may begin to recognize when it comes to grooming tactics or, sexual abuse, where you'll pick up on things around you that other people don't pick up. Remember, it's also a thing of opportunity. When the opportunity it presents itself, an abuser will or sexual predator, finds ways to get close to a child. So if a person has experienced this in their youth, they become very, very sensitive when they get older. Likewise, for a woman that has been abused or in an abusive situation, there's certain things you become very sensitive to. The tone in people's voice, body language, facial expressions, certain touches, certain looks, you become very, very hypersensitive. Hypersensitive, your startle response may be, you're constantly, remember, the adrenaline is pumping. You're constantly in a state of fight, flight, or fright. Freeze. Hold on. Fight, flight, freeze. You're in a constant state. You're in a constant state of, I have to protect myself. People say something, you're already on guard. You're already on guard because that's how you have been living. And so you don't know who to trust. You'll have flashbacks where. You'll have flashbacks in which You may hear the voices of your children when they were abused. You may hear the voice of the perpetrator. Nightmares of this event reoccurring over and over again. You know, you avoid certain places because you know that's where the abuse took place. You may not like a certain state. You don't like certain food or restaurants. You don't like certain cars, certain colors, certain people that look like, you know. And so this is something that really, when you are coming out of the situation, I really recommend that you connect with a good counselor, someone that understands post-traumatic stress and trauma, the trauma caused by domestic violence, you know, a trauma specialist, someone that specializes in trauma, to help educate you, because once you're educated about what you're going through, it helps to regulate. You know, when I went through my certification, one of the biggest thing is, you know, I was trying to figure out like what in particular type of therapy helps for those people that have been through trauma. And you know, cognitive behavior therapy is like one of the top. They have other trauma-focused type therapies, but the main thing that was said is therapy in general. As long as they're in a therapeutic setting, if they're in therapy, you know, some type of therapy is going to help. I am a big stickler with education, because when you change the way a person thinks, and as is really CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, but if you can change the way that a person thinks, it helps to change their behavior. You're acting a certain way or you're responding a certain way because of the way that you're thinking. And some thoughts are unconscious thoughts. Some are reactions. Sometimes we're reacting to something that doesn't exist anymore. And when you're dealing with post-traumatic stress, sometimes you're still responding and reacting to something that is long over with. With complex post-traumatic stress, you're still responding to your abuser because they're probably still in your life. The biggest thing, like I said, is to get into counseling, get some type of trauma education. Watch these videos to learn what you've been through to regulate yourself. When I say regulate yourself, meaning get you some information to know that you're not crazy. There's nothing wrong with you. You're responding to trauma. And that is almost like having a terrorist live in your home, and you and your family have been in bondage to a terrorist. I always made a comment, like the Tasmanian devil. You're living with the Tasmanian devil in human form, you know, that doesn't mind causing anxiety in the people. I mean, they're like the Tasmanian devil. They are. You know, they can't have their way. They have adult hissy fits. They have to the extreme. You know, and so having to live in that environment, and go back and look at Codependent, watch that video, the codependency, and how everyone has to adjust the environment, or have to adjust themselves in order to be able to live with a person that is completely out of control. You know, the other thing is that you have to learn to love yourself. You have to learn to reduce that anxiety, you know, that you've got to get to the root of the problem. You've got to, you know, address the issue, and the issue is if you've been exposed to or chronically exposed to trauma, you know. And so, like I said, you know, the question is how to deal with PTSD after narcissist abuse. First of all, you have to identify it. You have to identify what's going on in your body. You have to identify how you respond to the people around you. Sometimes the way that you respond, you know, people are like, "Ooh, she's mean," you know, or she's always argumentative. She's probably hurt and wounded. She's probably has some damage, you know, from the person that supposedly loved her and her family. And for some women that have become single parents, you know, that have to raise your children, you know, we're raising our children after, you know, and it's the after effects of the abuse, and you're having to go back to correct something, and now you feel guilty about having to go back and work with. Some kids have become adults and left home, and they're angry and they're hurt, and you see that behavior repeating again, you know, or you see them victimized, you know, because we couldn't get out the situation in time. Now we have to go back, you know, and many of us are like this, have to go back and try to fix something that we could have fixed a long time ago, but we didn't know how. No one provided us the information. Nobody provided us the support, you know, and well-meaning people just kept putting us back into situations they didn't understand. They didn't know what to tell us, you know. And so hopefully these videos are helping you. You know, get you a therapist. Get someone that understands trauma and post-traumatic stress, a trauma-based therapist, because you need to understand what you're going through in order to be able to survive it. You know, and that it is the narcissist abuse, or the abuse that you have been through. You've got to understand what your body is doing. Your body is responding. Your body has memory. Your cells have memories. Your brain has memories. Your brain is so into protecting itself that it will put memories in its subconscious. and your behavior is a reflection of what's going on in your subconscious, and you don't know why you're responding or acting the way you're acting. It's because it's a response, a mechanism to unconscious memories. The way that you say things, the way that you do things. Sometimes you can't respond to certain things because, remember the classical conditioning. Sometimes you won't respond a certain way because you're expecting a certain response, even though that stimulus is not there anymore. You've been trained that way, so you won't do something in fear of, this is going to happen. And then you have to retrain yourself, because if you don't know that's how you're responding, how can you change that? Because you're going to keep responding that way, and it's very uncomfortable. Hopefully this has helped you. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please let me know if this has helped. Hopefully this answered the question concerning post-traumatic stress and narcissist abuse. And I thank you so much for tuning in. Please share this video. You never know who you are helping. You think you're just sharing, but you don't know who's watching and needs to see this the moment that they're looking at it. Not because I'm on here or because I'm asking you to do it, because somebody needs to hear this. Had someone did this for me a long time ago, I probably would not have been in this position, so I probably wouldn't be able to help you. But I needed this information, and it was not available to me. Nobody was talking about it. It was a secret thing. But somebody on your Facebook feed or on your YouTube channels, if you share this information, somebody is getting this information. Somebody needs to hear this. Somebody needs to know that there's nothing wrong with you. You're going through something and you're responding to the abuse you've been through. Go to your local YWCA. Go find a victim advocate to help you. Email me, Dr. Carmen Bryant, drcarmenbryant